can't go back to a no. Like, I can't. You're not alone.
Neither are you.
The story of Ben Solo may go down as one of the most tragic in all of Star Wars history. From his days as apprentice to Luke Skywalker to his final breath in the arms of the one who loved him, Ben experienced one of the most traumatic and painfully short lives in the galaxy far, far away. And though he lost his way for a time to the darkness rising in him, I simply cannot believe he deserved to be condemned to die without hope. This is a man whose entire life had been manipulated by diametrically opposing forces who wanted to use him for his power. And from the moment he was born, the forces of good and evil fought over control of his fate. His very choice to turn to the dark side was hardly a choice at that. Everyone he trusted turned against him. And feeling overwhelmed from all of this, his fall from grace was all but certain. Though he was eventually redeemed from darkness and shared a few touching last moments with Rey, Ben's return to the light was to be short-lived. The Rise of Skywalker has been out for 1 year now, but Ben Solo will not be forgotten by us anytime soon. Not now, and I suspect not ever. It's a testament to his appeal as a character that, despite being extremely underutilized and literally at times cast aside from pivotal moments, he remains a fan favorite. In this video, I'm going to share with you why I believe Disney must bring back Ben Solo. Hopefully, even if you disagree, you'll have a better understanding as to why so many fans feel disenfranchised by the loss of Ben Solo. I recognize that not everyone shares my love for Ben. Many look at him and see nothing but a monster, especially for the murder of his own father, Han Solo. And while I would never downplay the horror of that tragedy, when we examine Ben Solo's sins, we cannot do so fairly without attempting to understand his motivations. Ben's actions are not born out of a malicious desire to do evil. He's never what I would classify as a totally evil villain. He's not irredeemable by design. In fact, I would say villain may be too strong of a word. Ben Solo was tortured, abused, and manipulated as a young man. His path to the dark side was ensured the moment his master and fellow students turned on him that fateful night at the New Jedi Temple. Now, there's some confusion here about the night Ben turned to the dark side because of some disconnect between the films and the comics. The films portray a more one-sided narrative from Luke's perspective while completely glossing over Ben's perspective almost entirely. The comics, while not my preferred method of storytelling, do a far better job of painting a clear picture of the events of that evening. Luke goes in to confront Ben, which apparently means reading his mind in his sleep, not even attempting a conversation, before pulling out and igniting his lightsaber. Certainly, Luke hesitates, but the damage is done. Ben sees this and defends himself by pulling down the roof on Luke, believing he had killed him. And then Palpatine, this voice inside Ben's head, calls down lightning and destroys the temple right in front of him, killing a number of students in the process. And Ben is horrified, of course, but powerless to stop this. A few of his other students return to the temple and immediately begin questioning Ben. They accuse him of murdering Luke and the other students and do not believe that Luke could have threatened him. And what's worse, they attempt to keep him from fleeing and pursue him, forcing Ben to defend himself multiple times. One of the fundamental issues I take with the sequel trilogy is that they all seem intent at times in building on the weaknesses in our original trilogy heroes. Now, this in and of itself is not necessarily a poor creative choice. My issue is that we're more often told about these weaknesses, not shown. But really what it seems like to me is almost as though they kind of reset our original trilogy heroes back to where they started. And they never progress. Essentially, Han goes back to smuggling, Leia gets consumed in politics, and Luke seems to once again struggle to overcome fear. I don't like that we have to sacrifice the goodness of beloved characters like Luke, Han, and Leia in order to explain Ben's troubled days as a young man. It just seems like in the sequels, the films go out of their way to portray the original trilogy heroes in a negative light just for the sake of giving context, what little context we're given, for Ben Solo's turn to the dark side. And I don't really like that because it's just something we're told. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but there almost seems like there's this modern attempt in films to make all of our heroes a lot more realistic and a lot more flawed. And I understand that to an extent because sometimes you have caricatures and very one-dimensional heroes in cinematic history. If we're gonna bring all of our original characters down in order to give context to a story, at least show it. At least give us real depth to this. Because otherwise it feels like we're just hitting reset, which is really what a lot of the sequel trilogy does. And there seems to be a certain level of expectation in this trilogy for the audience to simply accept what they're given. There are some glaringly massive gaps in the storytelling for Ben Solo that ultimately hurt the audience's ability to empathize with him. The fact that he could murder his father, Han, is so impossible to reconcile with what little context we're given in the entire trilogy that it is understandable fans were so outraged. And I'll admit, Han was one of my favorite characters from the original trilogy, so seeing his own son murder him was difficult to swallow, especially since I saw it coming a mile away. But if they had painted a clear picture in the films as they did in the comics, all of this would have been easier to understand. The loss of Han Solo would have been easier to bear. But the reality is that audiences are given an unfair impression of Ben Solo based on the poor writing in this trilogy that ultimately fails to bring about meaningful context as to why Ben turned to the dark side, why he was so estranged from his parents, and how he could hate his uncle so much. Leaving out these crucial details unfairly paints Ben Solo in a negative light. That's inconsistent and lazy writing. And even though there are certainly moments in the trilogy where it's implied that Ben Solo essentially hates himself for the choices that he's made, these moments are unfortunately extremely rare in the trilogy. The best one and the most impactful one happens in the Rise of Skywalker, when Kylo Ren confronts Rey on the Death Star, in which he reveals that he cannot return to his mother. And he also implies that given what Rey has demonstrated with her tendency towards darkness, that she is also now in the same situation. I will admit though, even with what little we're given, it is a very powerful scene. I only wish, again, that it had been expanded on further so that we could fully understand that Ben Solo actually does feel the weight and guilt of everything that he's done, and how he's not going to give himself a free pass given everything that he's done. When people tell me that Ben Solo had too much blood on his hands to be allowed to live, I honestly have a hard time grasping this. It seems to me that those who make this claim are often not providing a consistent basis upon which to draw such a conclusion. It seems so very arbitrary at times. Obviously, our nature to appeal to justice works in tandem with our imagination for fictional stories. How does one decide that even in fiction, a redeemed character has no hope but to pay for their own sins with their own life? How do you simply arrive at that conclusion automatically? Is there some unspoken rule being inferred here? Where does this come from? How is it that in reality there can be such strong opposition to things like capital punishment, but in fictional scenarios, we're quick to condemn characters like Ben Solo to death? If Ben were real, how many of us would be calling for his death? I'm sure some would, even if it were obvious he was repentant of his sins. But it seems to me that we're not being consistent when inserting real moral law into fictional stories. We're picking and choosing arbitrarily who gets to live or die. We're forcing these fictional characters into creative boxes without even attempting to look for alternatives. Why is it so impossible, even in fiction, for Ben Solo to atone for his sins without dying, without being exiled forever? Is it possible, even in fiction, that we could grant forgiveness to a character whose actions were not born out of pure evil, but rather indoctrination and manipulation? Ben Solo is 100% a victim as much as anything else. Because children do not ask to become monsters. They're taught to be monsters. Ben's entire legacy rests on people that he never knew. He's named after a Jedi Master that he's never met. His grandfather was a man who terrorized the galaxy that he also never met. Everything about his identity is tied to his legacy. And so he has this immense pressure built upon him from his very birth. And I really hate to say it this way, but to me it almost seems as though his destiny was set before he was even born. And when you have a character who's written this way, who experiences what he did, it's so difficult to then, on the same note, condemn him for what seems like aren't even his choices. I'm not really sure what Disney's plan was, if any, for characters like Ben Solo, but I imagine they did not anticipate him becoming as popular as he is. I think the way his character is mishandled, especially in The Rise of Skywalker, is clear evidence that this was the case. The film goes out of its way to ensure Ben Solo, the last real Skywalker, plays no part in effectively stopping the same villain who has been dogging his bloodline for 3 generations. I mean, when you think about, of all the people who should really have the right and reason to take this villain down, it should be a Skywalker. Kylo Ren learns at the beginning of the film that his entire life has been manipulated by this man. The voices that he's been hearing inside of his head have been Palpatine the entire time. His whole life has been built on a lie. Of all the people to bring about justice, why wouldn't it be Ben Solo? I mean, this is a hugely missed opportunity that I do not understand why the writers chose to do this. How they could keep him out of such an important scene is just beyond me. Every time I watch The Rise of Skywalker, I'm absolutely amazed at how effective Adam Driver is as Ben Solo. His forced mental conversation with Han and everything after this in the film is incredibly powerful storytelling. And it's especially impressive to consider since Ben literally has no dialogue for the rest of the film after he drops that now iconic "ow" line. His physical acting, as well as the way he emulates his father, Han, is absolutely mesmerizing to watch. It's almost like Adam Driver came to life in a new way as Ben Solo, unchained by darkness in a way that we've never seen before. There's an energy there that was hidden before when he was Kylo Ren, a playfulness almost. Even in his fighting style, you can see how more acrobatic and freely he swings his lightsaber. It's a stark contrast to the brute force style of his Kylo Ren persona. Ben is not only physically removed from the final fight, a fight that should have been the showdown of the century, and instead ended up being the most predictable, forgettable, and anticlimactic duel I've ever seen in Star Wars. He's only brought back to revive Rey and share a tender moment with her before he's torn from us, seemingly forever. What's worse is the film makes no attempt to acknowledge Ben's sacrifice to save Rey. She's the only one who seems to know what he did to save her. And Finn knew she had died, but he never seems to wonder how she survived. Rey mourns Ben only for the briefest moment before returning to her friends, of which I blame on the obscenely fast-paced editing of this film that apparently does not want us to process a single moment before rushing us on to the next. There's no attempt made whatsoever to honor his character's sacrifice. What an absolute insult to Ben. and to the many fans who have spent these 3 films deeply invested in his character. It's almost like The Rise of Skywalker is in an absurd hurry to sabotage and conclude itself and bury the hatchet. And I'm sorry to say, it succeeds. The Rise of Skywalker sends a very mixed message about hope, especially given how it treats characters like Ben Solo. Because you see, in this trilogy, Ben Solo embodies hope, that no matter how lost you've become, you can find your way back to the light again. Ben became an agent of evil to an extreme degree, and his redemption carries weight that transcends normal hero tropes. To come back from darkness is a far greater testimony than if you were already good and never turned to evil in the first place. It's why the story of the prodigal son in the Gospels is so powerful, because it's the story of a son who was once lost, found. A son who was once dead, come back to life. It is the ultimate tale of redemption. Ben Solo is essentially a type of prodigal son, but without the happy ending. Because you know that in the original story, the prodigal son, he gets to live and be reunited with his family and welcomed back, not penalized for his choice to leave and start a life of sin and darkness. It seems like the writers of The Rise of Skywalker seemed keen on utilizing this Christian imagery, but completely missed the most important takeaway of the story. Despite Han's sacrifice, despite Leia's sacrifice, despite Rey literally saving his life more than once, Ben Solo's death renders all of that meaningless. The systematic destruction of the Skywalkers is now complete, and we're left as an audience confused and utterly heartbroken. And artificially inserting a new Skywalker in the last seconds of The Rise of Skywalker does absolutely nothing for me as an audience. Not after what happened to Ben Solo. I've said this before, but I knew the moment I heard Abrams was writing and directing this film, I knew he would not let Ben Solo survive. I hoped that somehow I would be wrong, but I wasn't. Abrams has just become so predictable in this way, and I'm beginning to truly question his appeal anymore as a writer and director. He has a very twisted view of good and happy endings, apparently. But this is Star Wars, guys. It's not a perfect reflection of reality. It's not meant to be. Because it's more like a fairy tale. It's not even like normal science fiction. It's very much fantasy. And look, I know, even fiction draws inspiration from real life. That's the basis of almost all fiction. I get that. But when we speak in terms of justice and redemption in this particular story, we have to be willing to detach ourselves from reality long enough to believe fiction can work and work in a consistent manner. We have to be open to possibilities that may be difficult to think through. What would an ending with Ben Solo surviving look like? I don't know exactly, but I know it would have been possible, and that's all I care about. I know it would have been far more hopeful to let the last Skywalker live, to carry on that family name. In fact, I'd argue dealing with the complicated matter of his crimes against the galaxy makes for a far more compelling story than to simply kill him off or exile him forever. And even at that, by the time you get to the end of The Rise of Skywalker, even though the film kind of implies that both the First and Final Order are effectively defeated, the battle is over so quickly, it makes you wonder if it's actually over. There's this line that Finn just casually throws in there in the middle of this triumphant moment where he says, "People are rising up all over the galaxy." And you get a little shot of a couple of Star Destroyers getting destroyed and crashing across the galaxy. But to me, it almost sounds like the battle is not over. There's still forces to deal with across the galaxy. Why can't Ben Solo be a part of mopping up the rest of the First Order? Why can't the film at least launch them in that direction? Leave things open to interpretation, to future possibilities. The good news is, despite all of this, I think Lucasfilm actually has the potential to continue to make great Star Wars content, and in fact they have. But to me, Star Wars is at its core the story of the Skywalkers, the story of light versus the dark, the Force, the Sith, the Jedi. If you take that all away, I'm not sure there's enough to keep me interested. And mind you, this is coming from someone who's very much obsessed with things like clone troopers and all of the major space battles. I live for those things. But ultimately, I'm here for the Skywalker saga. If there ever is to be a future for the Skywalker saga, I believe Ben Solo is integral to that future. He is an actual Skywalker after all, and his connection to Rey as a dyad in the Force needs to be fleshed out. These two have so much potential for great future stories. It would be criminal not to expand on this. Their dynamic was unique and introduced some very exciting new Force powers. As much as I enjoyed the other characters in this trilogy, it seems apparent to me the only ones they handled with any real consistency were Rey and Ben. Their stories are completely intertwined now, and I cannot see one without the other. And I love Rey, but I do not want her in future films without Ben, and vice versa. It just feels wrong. How can the story proceed without both of them, given their history? As long as there remains this gaping wound in the soul of Star Wars, it will never be the same for me. No amount of prequel shows, Mandalorian seasons, or spin-off films will ever be enough to let me forget what happened to Ben Solo. I cannot dismiss the blatant insensitivity and poor creative decision-making done by the writers, producers, and director of The Rise of Skywalker, who condemned our boy to die. Lucasfilm has an opportunity to fix this. You might argue that Ben Solo died, and it's absurd to think that he could return. But there aren't really any clear rules anymore to the canon. Not enough to keep people from coming back. The sequel trilogy, for better or worse, fundamentally changed some concepts and rules about how we view the Force. Force healing, Force conversations, there's been a lot of new concepts introduced in only a handful of films. Not to mention that Lucasfilm seems pretty intent on bringing back seemingly dead characters already, like Darth Maul and Boba Fett, and I'm in it for the long game with Ben Solo. If this takes 5 to 10 years to happen, so be it. The sooner we let Ben Solo fade from the discussion, the less likely Lucasfilm will bring him back. There's so many ways to approach a new saga, but they need to build on what worked before. Ben Solo clearly works, and he works so well, audiences are absolutely glued to him on screen without him uttering a word. That's powerful. Lucasfilm needs to recognize that and do all they can to bring Adam Driver back to the role someday. Anything less than this will be a mistake. Maybe with this video, I have kind of beaten a dead horse, and I've been talking about Ben Solo for like a year. A lot of people are still talking about Ben Solo. That's kind of the point of this video, is that there seems to be an effort to make us move on.
You just mark the date on the calendar when it's okay to lighten the mood.
Never! It will never be okay.
From Ben Solo and the Skywalker saga, but a lot of us feel pretty disenfranchised by the ending. And I'm really not trying to trash The Rise of Skywalker. I think it actually has a lot of great elements to it, and it's not a film that I can't enjoy in a lot of ways. In fact, I feel that way about a lot of the sequel trilogy. There's a lot of things to enjoy about it, but ultimately when it comes to the writing and the way that it's concluded, it feels like a disservice to what's come before. But more than that, I feel like it's a missed opportunity. I've been trying to put into words what it is that makes Ben Solo such a great character. But the reality is that I think for me and for a lot of fans, it comes down to the way Adam Driver delivers his performance. Lucasfilm, I think what it is I think what's happened is that they see their mistakes. They see that the Skywalker saga was not doing as well as they wanted. There was a lot of backlash to it. Because it's such a central core part of Star Wars, to demand fans to move on from it and just accept the ending, it feels kind of disingenuous to me. And it also feels like with all of these new TV shows and films that have been announced, almost none of them have anything to do with the Skywalker saga. It feels like they're trying to force us to just move on. And I'm just not ready to. I'm not saying necessarily I need a sequel right now. You know, I need Ben Solo back right now. Like, I can wait. I can wait for it. And I know a lot of fans are out there saying that we need to move on from the Skywalker saga. Not everything has to be about the Skywalkers. I get that.
Okay, I totally get that. But really, a lot of us just aren't ready to move on. And it's not necessarily because we're incapable of letting go. It's not because we're necessarily obsessive about Ben Solo or anything. And I really would love it if people would stop implying that. The reason why a lot of fans like myself are so upset at the way things ended is because the ending didn't do our characters justice. I don't think there's a single character in the sequel trilogy who I think had a really satisfying arc. I mean, there's so many things that they did wrong with Finn. They sidelined Rose, who could have been in my opinion, could have been a great character. I don't think she was super well written. Even to me, I thought Rey was the closest to having a great arc from start to finish. And Ben Solo to me actually does have probably the best written arc, because I don't think his character changes in a fundamental way that's not a natural progression that makes sense. To me, the kind of retconning Rey's lineage doesn't make any sense at all and really hurts her story. It's the way that his ending is handled. Like, let's say if Ben Solo had been redeemed from the beginning of the Rise of Skywalker and had been in the rest of the film until the end and then died, like, maybe I could accept it. To literally like throw him out of the scene where he can't even fight Palpatine and just leave Rey to do it. So even though he's the Skywalker, he has absolutely no relevance to the final battle whatsoever. He's only brought back to revive Rey, and then he dies. I mean, it's so abrupt and cold, and like, I genuinely am trying to think to myself, how could anyone really enjoy this scene? And yeah, when you think about it, like, okay, so he sacrifices himself to save Rey. I would prefer him to live, but I could accept that if he hadn't just been redeemed 10 minutes ago. And he has no dialogue. He doesn't say a word. We don't hear anything from a redeemed Ben Solo. It seems interesting because Disney really seems like they want to replicate the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Okay, but they've made a few mistakes with that because they don't recognize that Star Wars is not like Marvel. But even more than that, they didn't go all the way. See, because with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there was a massive buildup to the final Avengers films. And the last two Avengers films are both pretty long. It's like a two-part finale. I mean, they're different movies, but they're also easily like two parts of the same finale in a way. So I don't know why they didn't do something like that similarly with The Rise of Skywalker. Like, it's not even the longest Star Wars movie yet. It's actually kind of short in comparison to a lot of them. But it's the finale. Why is anything being held back? I mean, J.J. Abrams even said, like, we're going to try some crazy stuff, because he felt empowered to do that because of the boldness of Rian Johnson. Okay, but the film is still short and abrupt in so many ways. Like, even the final battle doesn't feel epic, because it's barely touched on, and it makes almost no sense, because even though there's a million ships involved, you never really get the sense of scale of the battle. But I don't understand, like, why couldn't we have had a 3-hour movie with Ben Solo, you know, being redeemed halfway through in the beginning of the film, something like that, and then dying? All this to say, I have personally been really impressed by Adam Driver as an actor. In fact, I find myself watching his films just because, like, I want to see more of his acting abilities. The same thing with Daisy Ridley. I would love nothing more than to see Adam Driver play that role again, and Daisy Ridley play Rey again. And I think that given the fact that the sequel trilogy was not as successful as they wanted it to be, but most people, even the people that don't like the sequels, will admit that Rey and Ben Solo especially were like the best parts of the trilogy. So Disney clearly needs to see that. I mean, Adam Driver may not be interested in reprising the role or anytime soon, but you know, actors say that in the moment, but years later they might change their mind. I mean, I never thought in a million years Ewan McGregor would play Obi-Wan again, but here we are. He's playing Obi-Wan. I mean, it's like a dream come true for me. Like, I've been wanting to see something like that for such a long time. I don't want to see him recast. I don't want to see him turn into an animated short. Now, if they want to do a prequel and show him when he was a boy or something like that and have a different actor play him, obviously that's fine. If they're going to make sequels, I don't want anyone else playing him. I'm sorry, but to me, he is Ben Solo. He is Kylo Ren. Just like, to me, you know, Daisy Ridley is Rey. I just don't want to see them recast. You know, maybe Marvel can get away with that a little bit here and there, not Star Wars. So guys, that's all I'm gonna say. I know I've been kind of ranting. This is supposed to be a very like carefully edited video essay, but I just thought that I would come on camera at the end and just kind of share some thoughts. So this video is a plea to Disney and Lucasfilm. Please, for the love of all that is good about Star Wars, Bring back Ben Solo, get Adam Driver back in the role, and do his character and everybody else's character justice, because there's just something magical about his character. We didn't get enough. We just didn't get enough. I think you had great actors, and in many ways he had some great characters, but you just didn't, you kind of wasted a lot of them. So do it again, you know? Do it right this time. Like, and honestly, you know, I know there's a lot of backlash to these sequels, but what a lot of people are not hearing about some of this backlash, okay, it's not all driven by gender and race. It's because people genuinely have a problem with the writing. They don't think that these characters are written in a cohesive and compelling way. It really just has to do with the writing. I mean, there are so many issues I take with the story of the sequel trilogy. The reason I can enjoy it at the end of the day is because the actors sell it for me. The characters, even though maybe they're not well written at times, but the actors do such a great job with their role that I can buy into it. The films don't have longevity to me because of that. Maybe Adam Driver will come back, I'm not sure. But people are constantly trying to tell me like it'll never happen, and I'm just gonna kindly tell you to shut up, because you do not know the future. You do not know what's going on behind the scenes. You don't know what's going on in Adam Driver's mind. Obviously, he said that it sounds like he's done with the role, okay? Maybe he is, maybe he's permanently done. Maybe we'll never see Ben Solo again, at least played by Adam Driver, whatever. But it needs to be said that what has happened here should not be forgotten. Because if we let Lucasfilm and Disney get away with what they did to Ben Solo and Rey and everybody else, then we're telling them basically that we'll just accept anything that you give us if you just call it Star Wars. That's not the case. I'm watching very carefully what they do with these shows, especially like the Obi-Wan show, okay? Like, don't mess up Ewan McGregor's character or Anakin or anybody else. Just take the time and do it right. Like, I can wait. I don't need 10 shows at once. And I don't even think I barely scratched the surface about Ben Solo. I mean, and maybe you didn't like his character. Maybe you think that he's done too much evil to be redeemed. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I don't really understand why we have to set rules like that in fiction. So that's all I got for you guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be on the lookout for more content soon. I'm gonna be talking Godzilla vs. Kong, gonna be talking about all the new Star Wars shows. Also, you may have noticed I've started to live stream because I'm a gamer. I would really like to know what you think about all of this and what Disney is gonna do next. What do you want them to do? I don't know. People keep telling me that it's over, but Star Wars is all about hope. I mean, that's a continuous theme throughout Star Wars. So as long as there's hope, Ben Solo might come back. So I'm just gonna hold on to that because I don't know the future. But I do know that he needs to come back, and that's the point of this. And Disney, you're the guys that can make this happen. So please, please make it happen. Please bring back Ben Solo.
My son is alive.